Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're tuning in today because we are going to fundamentally challenge how you think about building a business. Seriously, if you've ever felt like your company is just hitting a brick wall, no matter how amazing your product actually is, well, you're going to want to pay close attention to this one. Today, we're diving into a massive paradigm shift. We're talking market architecture versus company building, exploring the specter of insight, and unpacking exactly why the biggest winners out there don't just build products, they entirely redesign the rules of the game. Let's get into it. So we're pulling from the Spectre Founder Bible today, and right off the bat, you need to know this isn't your standard run-of-the-mill business plan. It's really more of a complete intellectual operating system for ventures. It's a cognitive framework that literally forces us to stop obsessing over the surface-level features of whatever we're selling and instead look at the underlying economic infrastructure. It's about entirely rethinking the ground you're building on. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the product builder's trap, then meet the market architect. After that, we'll peel back the layers of the market, check out some real-world structural shifts, and finally, wrap up with overcoming founder biases.
Okay, Section 1, the product builder's trap, and why so many incredibly smart founders end up hitting an invisible ceiling.
Think about what actually happens when you decide to compete inside an existing market. You automatically inherit all of that market's baggage, right? You get stuck with the established distribution channels, the clunky payment rails, the legacy ownership models. You treat all of those things as fixed constraints. So sure, you might innovate at the product layer, maybe you create a slightly better user experience, or you undercut on price, but the structural inefficiencies of that market, they're still there. And that creates a ceiling, because no matter how game-changing your product is, your growth is inherently capped by the gatekeepers and the rules of the game you just agreed to play. So how do the real heavy hitters bypass that ceiling? Well, they totally change their vantage point. Which brings us to Section 2. Enter the market architect. I absolutely love this Spectre principle. The most powerful position in any market is not the best player, it is the architect of the game. Just take a second and really think about that. True market power doesn't come from just hustling harder inside a broken system. It comes from stepping outside of that system and taking control of the rules themselves. The contrast in mindsets here is wild. On one hand, the company builder is just trying to win market share. They're hyper-focused on a single product, endlessly battling it out against other players for a slice of the pie. It's exhausting. But the market architect? Totally different objective. They want to redesign the market itself. They're looking at the entire system, and their actual competitor isn't another startup. It's structural inefficiency. They aren't looking for a slice of the pie. They want to invent a completely new category. And this really boils down to the core questions they ask. Product thinking asks, what do customers want? Which is a great question, but it keeps you zoomed in on features and relying entirely on linear sales to scale. Architecture thinking asks a much deeper question. How does this market actually work? By focusing on systems and structures, architects build solutions that use network effects to scale exponentially, completely bypassing the traditional sales grind. To really grasp how this works, we have to learn how to see the matrix. So let's jump to Section 3, Layers of the Market. Every single market out there has an invisible architecture, and it's stacked in layers. Most founders get stuck right up at the top, the surface layer, just agonizing over products and services. Now, some go a bit deeper into the behavioral layer, looking at customer habits, which is better. But the real, massive, paradigm-shifting value, that gets unlocked at the bottom 3 layers. The institutional layer covering regulations, the structural layer involving ownership and capital, and the deepest, foundational architectural layer. Designing down at these levels is literally the difference between building a slightly nicer hotel and building Airbnb.
Because when you redesign from those foundational layers, you can break the traditional, clunky, linear value chain. Instead of raw materials moving step by step to production, then distribution, then retail, and finally the consumer, with middlemen extracting value and jacking up costs at every single stop, a market architect just collapses that whole chain. They create direct platforms. Value flows directly from creation to consumption. The friction disappears, the consumer gets a massive win, and the architect captures immense value just by cutting out the bloated middle.
Okay, theory is great, but let's look at what this actually looks like in the wild. Section 4, Real-World Structural Shifts. Let's talk about the institutional layer first, 71%. Think about how unexpectedly high that number is. That's the percentage of employees in Denmark who use artificial intelligence following clear guidelines, according to Nordic AI governance data. But why does that actually matter for market architecture? It matters because things like the European AI Act or strict corporate guidelines aren't just boring government bureaucracy. They're actively constructing the institutional trust layer. Without that governance, the risk explodes, or businesses get too terrified to adopt the tech, and the opportunity dies. Strong governance actually creates the safe boundaries a new market needs so it can scale. It's an absolute architectural prerequisite for mass adoption.
Now, checking out the structural layer, let's use a classic example, the housing market. A product thinker looks at real estate and says, let's build a better listing website. Maybe they add cool 3D tours or better search filters, and they capture a tiny little commission. But the architecture thinker asks, wait, why does buying a home even require a traditional bank loan in the first place? They innovate by completely redesigning the underlying ownership models, bringing in things like fractional ownership, peer-to-peer investment rails, and automated verification. They don't just make the search better, they make the existing architecture obsolete.
And companies are actively targeting these structural inefficiencies right now. Look at HubSecure. Their open core model, where the platform itself is free and open source, and they offer premium enterprise features on top, is deliberately designed to smash traditional vendor lock-in. They're going after small and medium businesses that are just fed up with locked-in ecosystems. They're targeting the maritime sector with its crazy compliance needs, real estate that's totally primed for real-world asset tokenization, and professional services that need real transparent infrastructure. They aren't just selling software, they're providing a whole new, open infrastructure.
So, if architecture thinking is this powerful, why isn't everybody doing it? Well, human brains are pretty tricky. Let's head into our final section, overcoming founder biases.
Incredibly smart people get completely trapped in the product builder mindset all the time, mostly because of deep-seated cognitive biases. We've got the status quo bias, which makes us assume that current market structures are basically laws of nature. Spoiler, they aren't, someone just designed them that way. We have an anchoring bias, always asking, what products should I build? We suffer from linear thinking, expecting our effort to scale in a straight line. And then there's complexity aversion. Market-level thinking can feel super overwhelming, so we just avoid it and go right back to tweaking the button colors on our app, even when the market itself is fundamentally broken.
But the good news? You can totally fix this mindset. Here are the rapid-fire antidotes to those biases. Step 1. When you enter an industry, ask yourself who designed the current market and why. Step 2. Always start with the architecture, not the features. What systems actually rule this space? Step 3. Don't let complexity paralyze you. Break it down into those 5 layers we talked about. And Step 4. Stop trying to play a broken game better than the next guy. Redesign the game entirely.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway from the Spectre Manifesto today. Markets are architecture. Architecture is designable. Therefore, markets are designable. You actually have the agency to rebuild the matrix. The rules governing your industry aren't laws of physics. They're just decisions made by people who happen to get there before you. You can make different decisions. So I'm going to leave you with one final, pretty provocative question to chew on as you look at your own ventures. Are you just building a product, or are you redesigning the game? Really think about that. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of The Explainer. I hope this structural lens helps you unlock entirely new categories of value out there. Keep questioning the architecture, and I'll see you next time.